start when your child is newborn, and then they say, see you later when you're 5 or 6. But then it's hard to, I feel, to keep the parents engaged when, when they're starting preschool, because there's so many other competing priorities that get added to the mix. And then, those parents know exactly what the parents club does, but then they don't have time anymore.
Right.
And so with all of those priorities, I guess I don't know how to help people to manage that and be a valuable team member.
Yeah. So in part, is part of your question, how do we capture that important knowledge that they have and help them transfer that to the next group that's coming in while still staying engaged?
I think that's some of it, and then also allowing positions for innovation.
Yeah.
So if you have new members, and like, okay, what are your new ideas for the group? Like, what are things that you've seen work in, whether it's at work or in other volunteer organizations that you've been in, and why did it work, or why didn't something work? I think hearing both of those are always helpful.
That's a really good point. And I think you can relate to this. How many times have you joined a committee of some kind, whether in a parents club or PTA or work or wherever, and you think you have this great new idea, and people shoot you down and say, oh, we tried that, it didn't work. Or we've always done it this way, so we're not going to do it that way, right? And then you feel like, oh, geez, that was a crappy feeling. So the notion of staying open to innovation and reinventing yourselves is really important, because you're a different group of people than they were 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And you may be, in fact, repeating things, but so what? If you think it's your own new idea, take it and run with it. Yeah?
How do you also, along with the children just growing older, but then I feel like on the peninsula, there are constantly families moving in and out of neighborhoods. I grew up a military child, so there were constantly people coming and going. But I guess with that now, I don't know, people have welcome committees instead of just an attention, oh, welcome this person to the neighborhood, kind of show them the ropes, so you have a buddy in the neighborhood or whatever it is, so that you feel like, oh, there's somebody I can go to and ask whatever question, even if I think it's dumb or stupid. And I don't know what other families are going through.
How many clubs do welcome committees? Only one or two?
We don't really have a committee, but we have a new member
social.
New member social.
Yeah.
New member coordinator, but also
How many new members are showing up to those events?
it depends. If it's it depends on where it's held. If it's at a park, if it's someone's house or a restaurant, it depends. Also seasonal, things like that. But we've had new member socials that have a good group. Barbara had one that we had at least 10 people there. There were old members, but there are also 4 or 5 new members. Foster City Club we're super small, so 4 or 5 is huge for us.
Yeah.
But on top of that, other board members reach out to new members as well, and not just the new member coordinator. So having multiple contacts from the board kind of helps meet people, and come out and feel more comfortable to take that step, that she talks about.
I think that initial contact, I would call it the opening sequence, like in a story, is really important. That, that person, Maya Angelou said something like, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And so in those initial stages of membership, it is really important that the leadership be aware of what it's like to be a new person, especially when we want to motivate them to be fully engaged and participate. Did you have a question over there?
No, I was just going to back on to what Andrea said, that actually I'm a new member last year, and I had that lovely personal contact from the membership coordinator who sent me a personalized email, and it was just very personal, and I think I was so inspired by that, so I just put my hand up and said, oh, I'm happy to take on that role for new members this year, so that would include an email, or even actually where possible just a quick phone call, hi, welcome, and if the person wants to ask you personal questions or meet for coffee, or obviously the actual monthly member socials. So and that's just like one actual formal role, but there's so many other people that will engage them through the play groups or through their interest subgroup, or there's just so many different opportunities that we can capture.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's great. We're going to move on so we can get through all this. So I want to talk to you about something called servant leadership. How many of you are familiar with this concept? Okay, good. So it was a framework articulated by Robert Greenleaf in 1970, and I'm going to share with you what the principles are. But basically, it really accurately reflects the sustaining principles of parents' clubs. And this is another one of those examples of who knew? Who knew there was a framework, We were just doing it. So basically, servant leadership, it starts with something that, Amo, you said earlier about taking a first step. And Robert Greenleaf's basic principle was that it begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. So we're not necessarily thinking, oh, I want to step into a power position, or I want to be the authority here, or I'm going to be the leader of this or that. It starts with an inclination that I want to be of service. So maybe I'm going to organize a play date, or maybe I'm going to put that party together, or maybe I'm going to take responsibility for a board position or whatever. So the other notions around servant leadership, focusing on meeting the needs of those people that they lead. So it's not about them, it's about the people that are in the organization. It's a coaching perspective. How can I bring out the best in other people? How can I keep giving responsibility back to the members for them to be creating their own experience? Facilitating personal growth in all members. Most of us come to a parents club because we're seeking some kind of growth. We want to learn about being a better parent. We want to know more about our community. We want to know more about ourselves. And then listening, being a good, deep listener. So the next slide are basically the 10 principles of servant leadership. And you can Google this, and you've got them on your thing. So, you can see this for yourself. Listening to people. Empathy. Empathy is such an important part of leadership in a parents club for me. It's being able to understand that that other person is having a different experience than I am. I have a lot of energy, I am a doer, I'm very results oriented, so I'm going to step into this position. And then the danger is, well, how come other people don't do it the way I do it? Well, I jumped right in, how come she didn't? Empathy is a really important quality, to be able to understand that other people have their own way of doing things. They've got their own life. It's not mine. Healing, the search for wholeness. Wholeness is another word for integrity. Eric Erickson and Carol Gilligan said that it's a developmental task of being an adult, that we be able to integrate our experiences so that we have a sense of fulfillment and wholeness. So as a servant leader, to be aware that this is what people are doing. Awareness, especially self-awareness. How am I being in relationship with other people? For me to be able to reflect on that. I was talking to somebody the other day, oh, she's 90 years old, by the way. I was facilitating a group at work, and we were talking about forgiveness. And Kitty is her name. And she was saying that she had this argument with her neighbor. And it was terrible. It had resulted in these really bad feelings, and there was a split, and now they weren't talking to each other anymore. And they had been friendly, and they needed each other. And she's old, and she lives alone, and it made her feel nervous that she didn't have his support. So she was talking to her son one day, and he said, Mom, why don't you just pick up the phone and just say, what, whatever transpired between us, not even sure what went down, I'm sorry. And I just really would like to have our friendship back. And she was telling this story and how powerful it was for other people in the room to just know that she didn't need to take all responsibility, she didn't need to blame him. All she needed to say was, I miss you, and I'm sorry that we had this argument. That was really evolved self-awareness. So It was a beautiful story. And she's 90. So you have a ways to develop some of those skills. Yes?
Could you just say a little bit more about the search for wholeness?
Yeah. Search for wholeness. What does that bring up for you?
The two things, I think the healing, the healing for the community, but then the wholeness of the healing for the whole of the community and the well-being of the whole community.
Yeah. The well-being of the whole community. So we live in a fairly fractured world, and a lot of us are feeling socially disconnected. A lot of us are, we live kind of far away from where we grew up. So you may be geographically distant from your family of origin. You may be emotionally distant, as I was. So I'm curious, how many of you live more than 200 miles away from where you grew up? Look at that. Yeah, about 3/4 of the room, maybe a lot more than that. Yeah. So a lot of us are disconnected from social networks that might be supporting and might be healing and might be contributing to our wholeness. So we need to find that in another venue. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So just one thing related to that. I know I've talked with people over the years who said, "Oh, are you going back to work?" And they've asked me questions like that, and I said, "I feel like what I'm doing right now with community building is helping me the most." I said, "I feel like that's what I need to do, because that's just going back to work. I think I would feel more disconnected, not having family here and all of these other reasons." So.
Did you hear what she said? Yeah. People ask her all the time, "Are you going to go back?" Let me have you say it yourself. Put it close.
They've just asked me, when are you going back to work? And I'm a teacher, and they've asked me, "Are you going back to work? And when? What are your plans? And don't you think you can do it all?" And I said, "Well, I think this is where I need to be right now. I'm working on community building, and it's important for our family." So I think that brings the wholeness for us. Yeah.
Very well said. That's great. This is not a rehearsal for the main event. That's right. You're doing the important work right now. It will pay dividends, I guarantee you. It pays dividends as your kids get older. Absolutely. So you can see these for yourself. Persuasion, the ability to create consensus. Persuasion does not mean control. It doesn't mean, I'm going to come in and my job is to persuade everybody to think like me. Persuasion is about making a case and then trying to build consensus around it. Conceptualization, being able to dream the big dreams. Foresight, a servant leader understands the lessons of the past and their effect on the future. This, is just really a great example here today of you inviting me to come and talk about the history of many of your clubs and how that will hopefully inform your present and your future. How many of you know who your founding members were in your club? Yeah, 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah.
It's you.
Yeah.
What?
It was you.
Well, I worked with a group of women. I taught a class, and there was a group of women. And so if you can find them in your community, maybe through LinkedIn or some other way, Facebook, however, post flyers around town. No. Many of them would just be thrilled to the bone to hear from you. Stewardship, again, servant leaders are stewards of the bones. Commitment to the growth of people, and the last one is community building. So I recommend that this is a really fascinating topic, and you'd be surprised how many people in, the names that you would recognize when you read this website were people that believe in this. Okay, we did that. So the next one. Ammo insisted that this be its own slide. This was not my idea, this was her idea. But it's a good one. This was a founding principle of the clubs that I started. I wrote about this in my book, that I believe in an inherent economic relationship that is based on reciprocity, which is giving and taking. And I think that I have always believed that each of us is going to show up to this experience. We're going to take what we need, and we're going to put back what we can right now. It might look like I'm taking more now, and I'm going to give more later. Not sure. But it doesn't matter, because life has a way of working those things out. And organizations have a way of finding balance based on the human capital that's available at any given time. So servant leadership, my philosophy, you know, human development, all kind of rely on this notion that adults need to feel a sense of autonomy and that they're in control of their own lives and that they're making choices. So it's really hard for somebody to say to me, Kate, you have to do this. We're really glad that you joined the club, but here's a list of things that we're going to expect from you over the next year. Ha! The rebel in me is going to go nuts and say, watch me break all those rules. Because that's just what I want to do. But if you welcome me to this club and you say, we're inviting you into this opportunity for you to create whatever it is you think you need for you and your family right now, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm down with that. Okay? So this is an important, this is really an important premise. Okay, so how do we motivate people? Go to the next one there, Emma. How do we motivate people? Again, I'm talking about the coaching perspective, which is a strengths-based approach, and that each one of us possesses our own answers in our internal clock. How many of you are a coach or have been coached? Yeah, great. So I have a friend, actually Wynn Burkett, who's one of the founders of the Golden Gate Mothers Group, and she's a coach. And she and I reunited last year. Hadn't seen her since 1996. And turns out that she's a friend of the board chair where I work. And she came to our fundraising luncheon. And I recognized her. I said, I know you. And so it turns out that she's now a coach. And she went back to school. And I hired her to do some work for us at San Francisco Village. So it was a wonderful full circle experience. But this was a question that she asks. What does your preferred future look like? You're in charge, you know, of making this, whether it's career-oriented or with your family or with your community or whatever it is. What's your vision? And then the next question is, what are you willing to do to make that happen? So if that's your premise in working with the members of your parents' club, it's logical that people are going to take responsibility for their own preferred future. So this might be a risk in that you're reframing things for people. You might say, well, nobody ever talked to us like that before, you know. But it's a new way of looking at it, perhaps. And so each of us, again, has our own purpose for joining a club and, for joining the club or for wanting to be on the board. So we're going to do a little exercise here. Yeah, you have a question.
Actually, I was going to share a story about
Please.
the coaching. If
2 minutes?
Great. Yes, so on that coaching slide, I am a co-director for Loma Moms, which is the Lafayette, Moraga, Orinda, and some of Walnut Creek area. And we do some charity outreach where we select a charity every year. So in past, we typically, our charity team has done a goods donation. It's a little bit easier. You collect books, you collect clothes, etc., and then you can donate to charity. But that had proved over a few years to be really hard because where do you store all that stuff? Where do you put it? How do you find members to help you move it all around? So then the team that started this year in our fiscal year decided to do fundraising. We'd never done that before. The members that volunteered had never done that before, so we were really nervous, and we're like, oh my God. So then we started out the year, and half a year went by, and just they had a lot of plans, but the action wasn't coming forward. So then we started to think, well, do we want to get new leadership? What do we, these are volunteers. Do we, what do you do? So I actually decided to go back to the team and say who would like to take the team lead role, because we had identified someone who actually said, oh, I don't want to be the team leader. And she was the one who was leading all that action. So then 2 new people stepped up, and I was very thankful, and then I actually have just been coaching them in order to move forward, and it actually has turned out well. So within about 2 months, they really were turning around and getting things going. And the benefit of that was they had already done so much work, gone into it so far, as that we were using the expertise to move forward.
Thank you. Great example. So we're going to need to move along because we're running out of time, so we're not going to do this. But I encourage you, it's in your packet. So go home tonight and do it for yourself. Answer some of these questions for yourself. Take it to your board. Ask members of the board to do it. You could have it be a membership activity as well. Okay, next slide. And then call to action is basically the goals. So do our goals match up with our stated purpose? And that's just, again, that's just back to the bones. And then how do we motivate others to jump in? I suggest that people are likely to act when they are inspired, when they are connected to their own purpose, so if they've had a chance to do this purpose statement, and that they're confident that their talent and contribution will be welcomed. Okay, that you've made a space for them. Okay, next slide. Now, the big question, what if nobody volunteers? And I know that you've all gone through this, right? You're all saying, whoo! You know, there's just this core group of us. The same people are doing everything, and it shouldn't be that way, right? We've all said that, and so here are some suggestions I have for why do the same people volunteer. They probably feel a strong sense of ownership in the club. They know what their return on investment is. They have stated their own purpose and they're feeling fulfilled about it, and so they're intrinsically inspired. They're results-oriented, well-organized, and naturally inclined. There's some you know who